On the 28th of February, the United States and Israel, in a series of coordinated airstrikes, attacked Iran. It signaled the beginning of another war in the Middle East. Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, Iran's Supreme Leader, among a whole host of senior personnel, were killed in these targeted strikes. Iran responded by attacking America's allies in the Gulf. It attacked energy installations and civilian areas as well. The entire region became embroiled in this conflict. At the same time, Israel sensed an opportunity to also make inroads into Lebanon, where it felt it could neutralize the threat from Hezbollah. The war had serious economic consequences. The Strait of Hormuz, the lifeline for oil, natural gas and LPG supplies from the Middle East, was being choked. In direct violation of maritime laws, vessels that once enjoyed free passage through the strait were blocked. Oil prices hit the roof, and countries heavily reliant on energy imports like India were left vulnerable.
आज करीब उसके 80 दिन होने वाले हैं। पिछले 4 साल में हमने ये दूसरा मेजर युद्ध है, तो इसमें कई हमारे पास नई समस्याएं जिनका सामना करना पड़ता। तो मुझे बहुत खुशी है आपको ये बताते हुए कि भारत एक ऐसा देश है विश्व भर में जिसमें ना कच्चे तेल की, ना पाइप नेचुरल गैस की, ना एलपीजी की कोई कमी हमने होने दी।
You hide behind the so-called international crisis, where again our own foreign policy is also responsible for the fact that India is at the receiving end of all the problems coming out of the Middle East. Intentions are clear. Your intentions are that you are not responsible for the horrible state of the economy. You are not responsible for what the middle class is facing. You are not responsible for what the poor are facing in this country. The Prime Minister has already washed his hands off his responsibility.
कांग्रेस पार्टी है अपना समय भूल गई कि उनके समय में किस प्रकार से पेट्रोल और डीजल के दाम बढ़े थे और दुनिया भर में किस प्रकार से पेट्रोल और डीजल के दाम बढ़े हैं। उसके अनुपात में भारत में बहुत कम दाम बढ़े हैं। अमेरिका, यूएई, कनाडा, ऑस्ट्रेलिया जैसे देशों में लगभग 40% दाम बढ़े हैं, जबकि भारत में कुल मिलाकर 3.5-4% दाम बढ़े हैं।
Hectic parleys ensued between India and its counterparts in Iran as well as the United States. Prime Minister Narendra Modi called repeatedly for peace. And in different phases of the conflict, there were Indian casualties too. In Iranian strikes in the Gulf and most recently, the killing of 3 Indian sailors off the coast of Oman in American strikes.
It is very sad and unfortunate that 3 of our sailors die, and look at the shocking stand taken by the government of India, our government, such a soft approach. Now it is Rahul Gandhi who is pointing fingers. Why is the government not taking action on its own? But government is an utter failure. How long will we continue to subjugate like this to Mr. President Trump and to US?
देखिए, सरकार बहुत कमजोरी दिखा रही है और ऐसा लग रहा है कि हम अमेरिका के सामने गुलाम हो गए हैं। हमारे लोगों को मारा जाता है और हम अपने लोगों के लिए सवाल भी नहीं पूछ सकते, और अमेरिका बेशर्मी के साथ जो जवाब दे रहा है, उस जवाब के बाद भारत सरकार का जो रिएक्शन है वो बहुत ही निराशाजनक है।
Diplomacy and politics are 2 different fields and domains, but problem is that the Congress party brings local politics into the diplomacy also. Fact is that government of India has already called the concerned US authorities from Delhi and has already sent the message across and has expressed their concern on how the people were killed and how things have shaped up. So government of India is doing what is required and what is within the diplomatic means.
Clearly, there's a lot of outrage in India, both on social media as well as among supporters of the BJP government, that you can't just attack innocent civilians. At the end of the day, these sailors were not combatants. They were not part of any active army or navy. there were surely non-lethal ways in which they could be asked to change their direction or not to traverse the Strait of Hormuz, but that was not what happened. They were killed not by enemy fire. They were not killed by Iranian fire or the Houthis or Hamas firing at them. They were killed by American fire, and justifiably so. There's a lot of outrage that you've seen in India over the last few days. The Prime Minister will be meeting Donald Trump on Wednesday afternoon here in Evian, and he will bring up this issue at the highest level and convey to the US President that this is not acceptable, that India does not expect a friendly country like the United States to attack and kill Indian nationals, and that too, the manner in which they have reacted to subsequently after the killing. The statement put out by the State Department was not particularly, was very contrite. They didn't express any form of remorse or regret. So this will be brought up by the Prime Minister in his meeting with Donald Trump. Also, there have been other issues in the last year. Remember, this is the first time these two men will be meeting since February of 2025. So for the last year, almost a year and a half, they have not met. And there have been a lot of issues in the relationship regarding trade, tariffs. Remember, the interim trade agreement has still not been finalized. It's likely not going to happen in this visit. I think one of the chief negotiators for the US side will be traveling again to India in the next few days. So that again is an issue that is pending fire. There is also the issue of the US waiver for Russian oil sanctions. Again, India does not like that, but from month to month, and particularly since this war began, they've been extending the waiver on these sanctions on a monthly basis. India says it decides to buy oil from whoever it finds best or is offering the best deal. So that again is a big pain point. And then the repeated claims that Trump has been making over the last year or so, I think more than 50 times, I've lost count really, that he was the one who brought India and Pakistan to stop and get a ceasefire, got India to stop Operation Sindoor. Again, India does not believe in those sequence of events, does not believe that any third party was involved. So all of these issues will be brought to the fore. Like I said, this is the first time they will be having a face-to-face conversation. They've spoken on the phone a number of occasions in the last year or so, but the first time that they will be meeting face-to-face inside a room, and that's going to happen Wednesday afternoon here in Evian. So a lot to talk about for both the Indian Prime Minister and the US President.
एक्सेलेंसी, आप जानते हैं कि मैरिटाइम ट्रेड की दुनिया में भारत के लाखों सी फेरर्स आज दुनिया के अलग अलग समुद्र में अपनी सेवाएं दे रहे हैं, विश्व की प्रगति में बहुत बड़ा योगदान दे रहे हैं, और मैं समझता हूं कि उनकी सुरक्षा भी उतना ही महत्वपूर्ण है। मुझे पूरा विश्वास है कि समझौते में सी फेरर की सुरक्षा भी सुनिश्चित होगी और उसको प्राथमिकता मिलेगी।
So when Prime Minister Modi attended the G7 summit, he made his and India's stand very clear. And this was also echoed in the bilateral engagement he had with President Donald Trump on the sidelines of the summit.
कई विषयों में हम बहुत मिल करके आगे चल रहे हैं। हमारे लिए खुशी की बात है कि हमारी दोनों टीमें भी मिलजुल करके हमने जो टारगेट तय किए उसको पूरा करने के लिए भरपूर प्रयास कर रहे हैं और हम बहुत तेजी से आगे बढ़ रहे हैं। पश्चिम एशिया में शांति के जो प्रयास में प्रगति हुई है, इसके लिए मैं आपका अभिनंदन करता हूं। आपके इन प्रयासों के कारण पश्चिम एशिया में शांति की एक नई किरण नजर आ रही है और हम आशा करते हैं कि चिरस्थायी शांति बनेगी। आप और हम सभी इस बात से सहमत हैं कि हॉर्मुज का खुला रहना एक वैश्विक अर्थव्यवस्था के लिए बहुत ही अनिवार्य है। फ्रीडम ऑफ नेविगेशन सुनिश्चित होना चाहिए और इस पर हम सब ने मिलकर के बल देना चाहिए।
As far as energy security was concerned, India was looking out for its interests. It continued to purchase oil from Russia, and Prime Minister Modi would make a visit to the UAE, which had recently left the OPEC, and also met his Canadian counterpart Mark Carney to forge energy partnerships. The G7 summit took place in the backdrop of negotiations between Iran and the United States to sign a peace deal, and a memorandum was indeed signed digitally. The memorandum included an end to hostilities in Lebanon as well. It called for the opening up of the Strait of Hormuz, with Iran not levying any toll for 60 days. It also called for assistance to the tune of almost $300 billion to help rebuild Iran, and secured a commitment that Iran would never procure nuclear weapons. It also crucially called for an end to sanctions against Iran and to allow for free export of its oil. However, the big question is, will this deal secure a lasting peace? the MOU does in fact raise many questions. For one, even though it talks about the United States, Iran and its allies, the signatories are only US and Iran. So Israel may very well claim that it is not bound by the agreement's clauses. Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, senses a chance to inflict serious damage on Hezbollah in Lebanon, but given that a deal has been signed, will he pull back his troops from South Lebanon?
Donald J. Trump is the only head of state in the entire world who is sympathetic to the nation of Israel at this moment in time. And he happens to be the head of state of the world's superpower. If I was in the cabinet of the Israeli government, I might not be attacking the only powerful ally that I have anywhere left in the entire world. And the second message I would give to some of those cabinet members, Bibi, to his credit, has not gone down this path, but to some of these cabinet members in Israel who are attacking the President of the United States, the other thing that I would say is that over the last 3 months, 2/3 of the defensive weapons that have protected your homeland have been built by American hands and paid for by American tax dollars. The problem for Israel is not Donald J. Trump. And anybody in Israel who thinks their biggest problem is the President of the United States needs to wake up and smell the reality of the situation.
US President Donald Trump has virtually signed the memorandum of understanding with Iran. On the Iranian side, it was signed by Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian. It officially and formally brings an end to the war in Iran over the last 3 months. This is a huge development, a collective sigh of relief across the globe. All G7 leaders have welcomed this. You've heard from the Middle East countries as well, from Oman, from Qatar, from the the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. All of the Middle Eastern countries that were battered because of this war have welcomed this development. It's a huge news. It's a huge development that has happened last night in Paris. Donald Trump signing virtually the memorandum of understanding with Iran. What are the clauses in this, and why is this a big win for Iran? Number one, Iran gets to export oil yet again legitimately. This was its single biggest source of revenue. Now it can legitimately start exporting. It doesn't have to depend on shadow fleets. Number two, on the nuclear question, yes, Iran explicitly says it will not acquire or develop a nuclear weapon, which has always been its stated position, but no commitments as far as not enriching is concerned. Even on the question of the nuclear fissile material, all it says is that the dismantling will be done with oversight from the IAEA. On the Strait of Hormuz, and this is hugely important, it has huge consequences for the rest of the world, including for energy importing countries like India. On the Strait of Hormuz, it will be reopened free of cost for the next 60 days. All the ships there are in the Strait of Hormuz can go back home, including the 13 Indian commercial tankers that are stuck there in the Strait of Hormuz. They can now go back home for the next 60 days. It will be non-tolled. It will be completely free of cost. But after 60 days, Iran, along with Oman, will come back with some kind of a service charge or a service fee mechanism whereby ships will start getting charged, which is a big win as far as Iran is concerned. Also, if you were to look at some of the other clauses, the $300 billion reconstruction fund, which America and its Gulf Arab allies are committing to rebuilding Iran, that's a huge win as far as Iran is concerned.
We have now seen a signed digital copy of the MOU, the Memorandum of Understanding between Iran and the United States. We'll come to Lebanon in just a bit, but given what you've witnessed between 28th of February and today, which side do you think is realistically in a position to proclaim victory at this point?
Well, I'm quite, I must say, I'm quite confused or embarrassed to be able to provide a judgment about it. On the one hand, Iran suffered a major military attack, which eliminated the Supreme Leader of Iran and quite a large group of senior political and military leaders in Iran. And for a period of time, Iran was completely under the control of the air attacks on different military installations coming from Israel and America. So this was certainly a military defeat to Iran. However, when you look at the agreement the bottom line, after the signing of the memorandum by the Iranians and President Trump, it appears that everything has returned to what it was on the 28th of February. The Iranians were committed for a long time not to develop nuclear weapons, and they had an agreement with President Obama. And it looks like the present agreement between President Trump and the Iranians is similar, perhaps somewhat weaker than the original agreement that President Trump withdrew from.
I ask you this question because Iran appears to have secured significant concessions. It had insisted that Lebanon should be made part of the deal. It has managed to tell the United States to withdraw forces from its vicinity. US dollars 300 billion will be spent in rebuilding efforts, and while it will free up Hormuz without charging a fee for 60 days, it will negotiate with Oman how the strait is to be administered after that. On the nuclear front as well, it has declared it will not procure nuclear weapons, but that's something it had been saying all along. How do you read all of this? Any specific gains that the last 110 days of war have yielded for America?
Well, I think that there are some exaggerations in the descriptions that you made. Iran will not be paid by America $300 billion. There will be a joint effort to establish an international fund. It remains to be seen who will invest in this fund, if at all. Certainly, it is not guaranteed that America or any other country will be part of this investment of $300 billion. So I think there are certain words that are written in the memorandum which are not really practical or consequential or real for something that will happen. And also, of course, let's not ignore the fact that while the Straits of Hormuz were closed, which certainly caused economic damage to many countries, but also I think that the siege on Iran caused also an economic damage to Iran itself. So I think that these definitely, and this is what I said before, there is a wide margin between the statements made by President Trump on the first place that Iran will be destroyed completely, that Iran will not have Air Force, will not have missiles, will not have Navy, will not have any of the things. And in reality, of course, this is not the case. Iran will have all of this. On the other hand, I think that Iran also learned a certain lesson from this confrontation.
Newly signed 14-point US-Iran memorandum of understanding, which calls for an immediate ceasefire, the lifting of US naval blockade, and the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. There's also sanctions relief for Iran oil exports. This leaves the Iranian regime, which is firmly in place with a lot on the plate. If these are the broad contours of the agreement, what exactly did President Trump achieve through a conflict that lasted more than 3 months?
Well, the conflict was originally mistaken, I believe. It should never have happened. The U.S. has achieved none of its war goals. Iran still has a nuclear program. It still has a defense industrial base, and it's even more of a threat to the region than it was before the war started. But this is what the ceasefire achieved. It started the procedures to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. And that was the most urgent issue, because every day, the strait remains closed, more and more global economic damage was going to follow. So President Trump eventually realized this, and move to effect a ceasefire and to reopen the strait.
But the strait wouldn't have shut in the first place if there was no conflict. So if there was no war, there would be no shutting down of the strait.
Exactly right. I'm not saying the war was a good idea. I'm saying the exact opposite. It was a very bad idea. The good news is that after 100 days of sustained strategic failure, President Trump and his administration have realized that and have tried to minimize the damage being done by this war. So you're right. Yeah. We'll never get back to the way it was before the war. If we're lucky, the maritime traffic through the strait will increase, but it's a real question as to whether it will ever get back to pre-war volumes.
Israel also heads to elections at the end of the year. Netanyahu supporters seem upset, and some have described the deal as a betrayal by the United States. America faces a midterm election too at the end of the year, and many experts believe that while Iran has certainly taken more damage and casualties, it's probably walked away with the upper hand given the kind of agreement that's been reached. Can Trump project this MOU as a victory to the American people before the midterm polls? The world, however, will breathe a sigh of relief. In India, not long after the latest phase of elections, the Prime Minister had called for austerity measures. The price of fuel was hiked and appeals were made to stop buying gold and cut down on foreign trips.
जब तक हालात सामान्य न हो, हम सोने की खरीद को टाले, गोल्ड की जरूरत नहीं है। ये विदेश में वेडिंग इनका फैशन खूब बढ़ रहा है, लेकिन इस पर भी बहुत विदेशी मुद्रा खर्च होती है और जरूरी है कि भारत में ही अपनी वैकेशन मनाएं। और वेडिंग के लिए भी मैं नहीं मानता हूं कि भारत से अधिक कोई अच्छी पवित्र जगह हो सकती है हमारे लिए।
But if the situation now does indeed improve, thanks to this deal, the worst may well be behind us. Let's hope that's how it is.